tools to succeed.
They will strive.
We will strive.
They will thrive.
We will thrive.
They will rise.
Yes, we will. We're elevating futures. When we're elevating futures. Futures, yeah.
My guest today is Jenee Wood, the Chief Learning Officer at Transcend, a leading nonprofit in school innovation and co-author of Extraordinary Learning for All, How Communities Design Schools Where Everyone Thrives. In her role, she helps communities redesign schools to create learning environments that intellectually engage, emotionally connect, and personally empower students, moving beyond the outdated industrial-era education model to prepare young people for success in the 21st century. Jenee, welcome to our podcast.
Hi, Dr. Tracee. Thank you so much for having me, and thank you to the audience for listening to me and being here. It's such an honor and a pleasure.
Yeah, so I am so looking forward to digging in, and I think I want to start with your teaching in Atlanta schools. Tell me a bit about your experiences there.
Let's start with my time in Atlanta. So a couple things to know. Atlanta is my hometown. It is where I grew up. And I taught in Atlanta Public Schools, which is about 10 miles, a different district, but about 10 miles from where I grew up. So my teaching experience, I think, was on the whole just such a deep learning space, but also a deeply personal experience that also changed me and hopefully had impact on the young people that I worked with, but was really powerful. And then there were a couple things to know. I was a special education teacher. I was middle school, 7th and 8th grade, and I taught in all of the different settings. So general ed inclusion, resource, push in, pull out, all the things, both in English language arts and social studies. I was a teacher at the same time that my little brother, who's 13 years younger, his name's Nolan, shout out to Nolan. I'll send this to him. He won't listen, but we're going to shout him out anyway. At the same time that he was being diagnosed for special education services. And that juxtaposition between being a teacher in a system and then being a family that was resourced to navigate that system was profoundly different. And I think it was one of those moments intellectually, you know, things like, oh, there are some systems or schools that are providing better supports for students. There are some places where students are having profoundly better experiences. But seeing it up close and understanding all of the million different decisions that you're making as a teacher, as a case manager, that allow parents to really access and use the IEP, the individualized education plan, to utilize that process to get what they need for young people. I really felt and saw the stark dispositions between that process. So as I was teaching, I worked with incredible educators, smart, caring, loving people, but we were also all in a system that was pushing us to do certain actions. So the IEP, we got to get that done for 97 kids. Write it down, get it done, pass it off. If the family doesn't come to the meeting, put it in the mail and they'll sign it. And when you think about that, this is what we call at Transcend an industrial approach, which I'll hopefully narrate a little bit more. I could see all the ways in which that approach wasn't actually allowing the families that I worked with to use that process to advocate for their young people. Meanwhile, my mom and dad were rolling 40 people deep, including character witnesses, into their IEP meetings. Experts here, experts there. That ultimately really allowed young people, my brother, to engage in that process in a way that allowed him to get what he needed from school. So that was like really the core teaching lesson and experience that I learned, is I saw this like profound distinction through that juxtaposition of what some young people in our country are able to get at schools and what other young people are able to get, and how the system that we have designed around it either enables that or hinders that.
Wow. And that is so true. I have an immediate family member that struggles with mental health issues. And so as a nonprofit leader, I always tell people that I provide services as if my brother is sitting.
Yes.
And
Yes.
when I serve clients, I feel like I'm serving my brother. And so it's very important to give the clients we see the same grace that we would hope that our family member would receive. So your story resonates with me on a lot of levels.
Thank you, Dr. Tracee. That resonates with me. You didn't ask me this question, but we're in a podcast. Can I tell you another thing?
Go ahead.
That I think really illustrates the point that you're making. It's my favorite piece of data. So everybody needs to know that I actually started after I was a teacher. I then worked in Teach for America. I worked in knowledge development there, and then I ended up leading the knowledge team, which had a research component and a learning component. And what we were doing, there were several questions we were trying to ask at the time, but what we were really trying to understand is what is the distinction and what is the difference between our teachers who make gains, who make academic gains with their students, versus our teachers who don't, versus our teachers where there's regression. And my team was trying to study, how does that happen? And we did everything you could imagine. We changed all the variables. We asked all the questions. We looked at all the data. We said, how often do you plan? Do you have a master's degree? Do you have a PhD? Do you plan in groups of teachers or do you plan by yourself? Do you make your own lesson plans or do you get them from the internet? What do you do? What do you do? What do you do? So that we could try to understand if there is causal, that's the holy grail, but at least correlation between what teachers were putting in and what they were putting out. We did all these pieces of data, and it was only one question that ended up separating the teachers who made academic gains versus the ones who didn't. And it was the answer to this question. The students in this classroom are students I would want my own children to know. Just think about that. That was the question that actually separated whether a child grew a year or two in reading or whether they didn't, whether they grew a year or two in math or whether they didn't. It was this orientation and disposition from the educator about the extent to which the child in that classroom, they would want that child to know children that they know, and we can then extrapolate and say that they were viewing those children as their own children, as people who could know their own children, love their own children, play in the playground with their own children. It was that question. And so what you're saying about orienting towards everyone that you're working with, clients, and saying, what if this person were my family member or my child? What would I want for them? It's a powerful orientation. And I have at least seen in my work and research that it absolutely has an impact on what students are able to learn and achieve.
Well, we're definitely going to obtain the link to that study and offer it as a resource because that is very valuable and very, very important. In our work in Toledo, a lot of people have asked the question, why is Center Hope so effective using paraprofessionals? So that provides an answer. And for us to return to our orientation on why we're here and spend more time and more resources in supporting our teachers.
Yes.
So that they are able to reconnect with that positive orientation that they often had when they started.
Yes.
When we had the file reports and all of the external demands and the legislative demands sometimes cause us to fall out of love with the profession. And so since the children are in close proximity,
yes,
and we're dealing with them every day, too often they feel the brunt of that frustration.
Absolutely. And they're experiencing, I think, what I'm seeing every day. So I've been at Transcend, at the organization that I work with now for 10 years. And in that 10-year journey, what we have seen is that the design of the thing around you, the design of the system matters tremendously for both the mindsets and actions of young people and the mindsets and actions of the adults who serve them. So that's like the perfect segue into some of the things that we are learning and doing at Transcend.
Absolutely. So tell me, what catalyzed the transition from the classroom to Transcend?
Oh, great question. There was a couple of things. So I thought when I came into education that I wanted to be an academic. I wanted to be an economist. That was actually where I came into education, through the back door of international development. And spoiler alert, you read every international development text and like the epilogue is, how do we change all these things? We need to educate people. Education was always like the panacea. Take this medicine and then corruption, we got it. We'll fix it. All these things, right? But no one had actually asked the question, how do you make educational systems, particularly in deeply impoverished or marginalized contexts, that can even enable that to be true? And other spoiler alert, in America, we are like a microcosm of the global context. Everything that you see globally is 100% happening here. So I thought that I wanted to go back to school. I wanted to go back to Oxford, study with my Don, and like continue to do a DPhil. But I came across the Teach for America website, and that got me in. And once I got the bug for understanding the ways in which one of the biggest human rights issues that we are facing, I would say globally, is right here in classrooms, is right here with students, is 10 miles away from my home, it completely shifted my orientation. And so when I was teaching, I loved my young people. I loved working in schools, but the context in Atlanta Public Schools at the time was drastically changing. It was changing a lot. And so I raised up my head and I said, I want to continue teaching, but my principal, Dr. Saunders, shout out to you. This woman that I love, she's leaving, and my co-chair is leaving, and my district admin, like all these people were leaving, and so I said, okay, maybe I'll go back. Then I got a call from Teach for America and from Stephen Farr, and he was basically like, "What are you doing next year?" And I was like, "I think I'm going to go to grad school." And he's like, "No, you're not." Click. Calls back and was like, "We got a job for you on the national development team. We want to understand, what was happening in your classroom, essentially, how you were able to get gains in your classroom, and we want to understand our classrooms better." And so I ended up joining Teach for America, and then I worked there for 6 years. And I think they were doing incredible work there, but the question and lens was very particular. It was on the teachers. And what I saw, what I learned from studying thousands of classrooms and from visiting thousands of schools is that in general, the box that we are asking teachers and administrators and young people to operate in is the same. You might be getting incrementally better results from this town or this town or this city from this city, but on the whole, teachers are operating and young people are operating in a core design that is really limiting their potential. So I said to myself, I need to be operating at a different altitude of the problem. So instead of being so obsessed, and we still need that work, do not hear me wrong. No one on this podcast hear me wrong. We still need that work. But we also, at the same time, and I think this is true of education, we're having to pursue a lot of questions and pursue solutions at the same time that we're delivering the experience of education. It's not like we can close doors and stop school and fix everything. We've got to do it all at the same time. So that then got me through to the question of what is this box that teachers and young people are operating in? How did we get to the box? What are the limitations of that box? And most importantly, how do we design ourselves out of the system that we have inherited for, over a century that might have gotten results that we needed at the time, but we now know are just so far away from the kinds of experiences, the kind of outcomes that when people actually need to thrive. So what catalyzed me from teaching to then studying classrooms to then thinking at the design and more systems level was just like pursuing and seeing different questions and being, I would say, an academic at heart, where I'm always saying, what's going on there? What's going on there? Why is that way? And I have found that if you just keep asking why, it's going to like propel you to go to that next level of insight, that next level of operation. And so for me, I would say what got me from teaching to then thinking about the questions I'm pursuing now to writing this book is trying to answer why. Why is that thing happening? Why is that thing the way it is?
That's wonderful. We're going to get into the design in more detail. But first, I just want to ask you, on behalf of a lot of women
Yes.
who may have been impassioned by teaching earlier in their careers, and it may be time for them to move on, right? I think a lot of times some of the issues that we have in classrooms is that as educators, we may be staying too long. Can you speak to some of the other opportunities to impact change, just like your journey? You found that there was another way. What are some careers? What are some paths that women could pursue when they feel like they may have been in the classroom a little too long?
That's a great question. Let me break down a bit of the premise. I promise I'm going to answer it. Let me break down a little of the premise of the question and continue to move forward. So, I think you're hitting at something really important, which is the more spiritual, effective experience of being an educator. Something that people I think do not realize is that, my husband also taught and was an assistant principal for 11 years. And so we met when we were 24, and we were in schools. And even though I was not in a school context, people love people who are teachers, and I think what folks don't understand is that it's the 5 a.m. wake up calls. It's the 6:30 or 6:40 being at the bus stop to let the kids in. It's the regiment of every day in, day out, and also operating within a context that is so fixed and so designed that gives you little autonomy. So I think part of what I hear when I hear educators and women educators too say, I'm exhausted, I'm ready to go, there's a couple things that are animating it. One is it's not the children. Generally speaking, I've heard that children are generally the same everywhere. It's like they're going to have some antics, they're going to be silly, they're kids, and you just got to like understand that. But it's the box that's surrounding them. It's the lack of autonomy. It's the inability to like do the things that they think might matter that will actually impact young people, but they've got a mandate or something that says we've got to test and we've got to get these results. Focus on that. So those are sort of the issues that I'm hearing that I'm sure you've heard too, Dr. Tracee, in terms of why people are getting exhausted. It's that system that is around them. In terms of other opportunities, I always say, and I've always learned myself, and I plan on doing this at some point myself, that we should be in schools, then we should be out of them to learn, and then we should go back into them. So the first thing I would say is I'm in the part of my journey where I'm out right now, but my goal is ultimately to get back in it, through whatever lever a system will have me, either for teaching or not, because I do think that there is bi-directional learning that needs to happen. So I would say to folks, if you are in that place where you're like, I just don't think I can serve the young people in front of me, great. I actually advise you to have that reflection and then say, what are the other things I can do? Okay, so now to your question. The first thing is like schools are always needing, and we have in some ways developed a role that I'm excited to talk about that doesn't exist at large in the education space, but I think could. Schools need more people doing more things to get them out of that core design that I'm talking about. We need people to do that. And so one is I'll talk a little bit later about it, but if people are interested, if they are hearing in themselves, oh my goodness, like we need to redesign school, how do I get involved? I think that there is a role that we need to introduce in the system at large. We call it design partner. Schools can call it whatever they want. But imagine that teachers could say, I've taught. I'm really intrigued by the big questions. I want to get into design. I want to figure out how to redesign this box. That is one role that I would say we need to advocate for. We need to get people excited about it, and we need to invent space for people to do that, because that's the thing that I'm ultimately hearing. It's not the children. It's not even sometimes the other adults. It is like the box that we are operating in and what it requires of us. So for me, I would say the first thing is get really clear and understand what is it about the experience, about teaching that you are saying, I need to take a break. Really analyze that so that you can understand. For some people, girl, it might be the kids. They just might be like, you know what? Tired of raising kids. I got to get out of here. For those people, if you're exhausted with children, you can't deal with them anymore. Okay, there might be some other things that you need to go do. I recommend Orange Theory. I recommend like other jobs, like truly step away. Now, if you are saying, no, my heart is still in it with the children, my heart is still in it with education, we gotta create another job for you. That's thing one. That's my only sale pitch. My second thing I would say is I know a number of people who have left the classroom who end up doing a lot of consulting with schools, consulting with people, consulting with teachers who want to change their practices. I think that's wonderful, and I think that's great, and we should think about that for teachers. We should be inventing and thinking about other jobs that educators can do that can still impact schools, even if we are not teachers anymore or out of the classroom. The next thing I would say is sharing that expertise that you have gained with other people through cohorts. There are so many different conferences that I know would love to have consortiums of teachers that are coming and sharing practices. So I think giving back and sharing learning is another thing that you can do, but still stay within the educational space. That is a bit of the lessons from my own journey, even if that's not my exact path. Those are some of the lessons and some of the things I see in practice.
So those are all very, very, very helpful and empowering. And it's a message of empowerment because
Yes.
if we only impact the classrooms and we're limited to the classrooms, then we continue to feel powerless in the situation and really locked in. But being a part of the solution, getting into consulting, going into redesign, starts to set the conditions so that the next cohort, the next generation of educators won't feel so constrained. So
Yes.
thank you for that. Um, let's also talk about community because I've talked to a lot of education experts and yes, of course, schools are the center of education, right? And it's central to the education space. But a lot of people I talk to still look at it as everyone comes to the school and it's a part of this system
Sure.
that you're talking about. And oftentimes, individuals, children, families from disadvantaged and under resourced communities can't connect with what is recommended or what's proposed because it still doesn't reflect them. It doesn't reflect their lives. It doesn't reflect, there is such a contrast once you walk out that door as to
Yes.
what real life is like. And I haven't heard enough
Yes.
education experts talk about it. It's just like, we're going to get an initiative. We're going to bring in businesses. That's great. We're going to build it and we're going to financially and economically empower students. That's great. But it's particularly with students of color, if their families are not okay, if their neighborhoods are not okay,
Yes.
then it's hard for them to buy into the opportunity that is sitting right at their fingertips. So can you talk to us about the concept of community-based design and education and why it's central to your work?
Yes, I love this question. And you're so, so, so right. I think for a lot of times we've defined the school as the thing that sits in the middle, and community is the thing outside, and there is a sort of weird boundary that we say, yes, come in for your learning night, come in for work, day study. But we don't actually view all of ourselves as sitting around a table as part of that school community. We define school community, very importantly, as administrators, experts, young people themselves, business leaders, community stakeholders, and community-based design is the process of bringing all of those people around the table to collaboratively redesign school towards a far better outcomes, far better experiences that are designed to a community's wants and needs. What community-based design answers, Dr. Tracee, I think, is a really important question. We have spent a lot of time in education thinking about what are we going for. We have done, I think, a lot of great work in the last 30 years of understanding what a broader set of outcomes could be. So not just academic achievement, but all of the socio-emotional well-being things that we know matter for young people. We've thought a lot about that. We've thought a lot about why we're in education. I have been a part of a lot of conversations, particularly during the pandemic and after, of young people, of teachers saying, why are we in this and what is the purpose of school? That was a really important, I would say, undercurrent discussion happening during the pandemic when we saw, in some ways, elements of school break in a way we've never seen before. But what we haven't really asked ourselves truly deeply is, how do you get to all of those outcomes in a way that is not top down only, meaning it's not just a superintendent coming in and saying, I've got a vision, here is the answer, here is my 5-year plan, go forth everybody and do it. That's one way. And we need to pursue change that is not just ground up, where we're asking teachers to come up with all of the different solutions and in their individual classrooms. There's got to be a third way for pursuing change in our communities and for pursuing redesign in our school communities. We're positing that community-based design is the way to do that. And so in our process, what we do is we're bringing together a couple of different pieces. Number one is that we start with young people and their voices. And so this is something that is in sort of your question, which is, what is that? How is school actually reflecting what's going on in the real world? The number one thing I see in my research and my conversations with young people, they are telling us loud and clear, school is not relevant. Okay. What are y'all talking about? The stuff that I need, like my friends and I have a joke. We'll pick up the phone and they'll say like, how are you today, Jenee? And I'll say, well, another day I haven't used y equals mx plus b, another day. Now, I know that. I'm sure that there are people in their professions who use it. Please do not come for me in the comments. I am certain. I also know that mathematical thinking is very important, and that while I might not be using that particular formula, that I might be using the mindsets that are underneath it. I understand that. I get that. But the essence of the joke is that what kids are spending 15,000 hours of their lives doing is not relevant. So we start community-based design with really understanding what young people understand about the world around them, what they want from schooling, what they're getting from schooling, and where they want it to go. So we start community-based design by being really obsessed with the actual users of school, who are young people. One of the things that we do first is that we get empathy for the student's experience. So we work with what we call design teams that consist of educators, young people, principals. We've done this in communities in DC, for instance. If you were to read our book, Extraordinary Learning for All, coming your way November 20th, we chronicle 4 school communities who have gone through and done community-based design journeys in very different ways. One of the things we know is that our schools and our communities are varied. They are so varied. And in a country as big, as diverse, with as many needs as we have, we've got to have processes that allow communities to come to solutions that are much more community-centered and much more community-based. So we start with understanding young people. And then what we do is we take the educators, we share with the educators what young people have said about their school experiences. And one of the most profound experiences for educators, what we hear, is the space between what they think school is doing, what they think they're accomplishing, versus what young people actually think they're accomplishing. One of my favorite schools, there was a 35% gap. Something like 65% of teachers thought school was highly relevant, and like 30% of students said, yes, what I'm doing is highly relevant. That's an example of one of the methods of community-based design that helps educators and students be speaking the same language a bit, understanding a little bit, because that's also the thing, is that community-based design allows us to get to a shared sort of language and nomenclature around what we're going for. That's thing one. Thing two around community-based design is that we've actually got to get people designing away from all of these experiences that we know are not helpful. So let me just get in, Dr. Tracee, a bit to the design, because I think when I say school is design, people are like, well, yes, the building is designed, Jenee. There are classrooms, there are bathrooms. Yes, I know. But let's talk about the other aspects of the design, the experience design of school. Mostly everybody who's listening to this podcast has had some sort of schooling experience, whether in the United States or outside of it or both, where you got up at a certain time, you maybe got on a bus if you were blessed enough to have bus access. You got to school, the bell rang, 8 o'clock, you went to this class, you went to that class, you went to that class, and the bell basically told you where you were supposed to be, what you were supposed to be learning, the pace of your learning. And generally speaking, we all have that experience. And what we're knowing and what we see when we talk to people when they get out of school, when they're in school, is that number one, that wasn't helping them actually understand who they were, what they were good at, what they weren't good at. It wasn't helping them actually access the experiences to even have a relationship with the content, to be able to use the content outside of school. It doesn't actually work for a lot of people. A lot of folks feel like when they get out of school, what have I spent my time doing? What have we been focusing on? This is particularly true for marginalized young people whose school and home community, there can be such a divide between those spaces in ways that we find are ultimately unhelpful for folks as they grow up. So one of the things we have to think about is, how do you get away from that design? And how do you marry that with proven scientific approaches that we know impacts learning? That is really important in our process. We are not just trying to go from a standard bell schedule to something that seems more joyful and fun. Although joy and fun matters, it also has to be impactful. One of the important things to know about the current design of school is that many of the researchers that comprise the science of learning and development, which is an interdisciplinary field, what they, that research is very deep, and I recommend folks to get into that. But one of the implications and insights that's coming from that is that the way we've structured school actually doesn't reflect how we know people learn. So there's a reason why, Dr. Tracee, if I were to ask you what some of the best learning experiences you've ever had in your life, you may tell me music. I did music and oh my goodness, that helped. You may tell me sports. You may tell me some other things like when I was learning to, I remember I asked a young woman that I was speaking to in Tennessee what her best learning experience was. And she said, well, I learned from my sister who's in cosmetology school. She comes home and she practices on my hair and she practices my makeup. And that's the best learning experience I've had. Yeah, I'm sure it actually is, because there are things about those learning experiences that the science of learning and development tells us ultimately works. The first thing is something that is highly relevant. You're able to sit and understand it and get it, but then you're able to immediately apply it. So if you're learning how to do a curl, you're learning how to do a curl, you're learning how to do a nail, great. You learn how to do it, you see some other people do it, and now you're going to go practice and you're going to go meaningfully practice and repeat, that action. That's a small example, but we know that the way we do school right now doesn't actually align to those insights of science. So we've got to bring that together. And our process is bringing community together, but it's also understanding that experts, people who know things about the brain, they are part of the community too. And we've got to bring their insights along with the insights of parents and caregivers together so that we can then say to ourselves, what does social studies need to look like if we were going to be maximizing connection and community, young people actually feeling connection with each other, but feeling connection with their community, so that school and community, there isn't this huge chasm between those experiences. Those are the kinds of things that we do in community-based design. And then we collectively come to and come up with school experiences that are fundamentally different and better. In our book, we chronicle 4 communities that have done this, from Van Ness Elementary in Washington, D.C. Then we go to the the cornfields of North Dakota, and we look at a district called Northern Cass. Then we go to Brooklyn STEAM, and we look at how a partnership between the New York Public City Schools and the Brooklyn Navy Yard have created a really powerful school model. And then we go to a school in Chicago called Intrinsic. And you can see in all of those examples how they are coming to very different solutions in those communities. But by bringing those people together, they are designing something that is specific and unique to what their community and young people need. And those are the kinds of solutions we posit are going to get us away from industrial learning, away from one size fits all, to learning that's a lot more personal, a lot more personable and customizable, and a lot more aligned to the kinds of work environments and, frankly, the world that young people are going to inherit.
Okay, so tell me also about the leaps for equitable 21st century learning, which I'm sure some of those leaps were embedded in your
Yes.
conversation about community-based design. But could you elaborate just a little more on what these leaps are and how they differ from traditional educational approaches?
Yes. So let me start by saying, in education, we have done a really good job, I think, of asking, what are the outcomes? What should we be driving for? What should young people know and be able to do? However, equally important in their own right are the experiences that young people are having. Experiences meaning the interactions, the activities, the ways of being, the ways of learning content. And what the leaps are 10 categories of experiences that we believe most need to change in order to really help young people have the kinds of experiences and outcomes that are ultimately going to drive towards better solutions for them in the short term and long term. So on one side of the leaps, everybody just imagine a 2-column chart, a T chart. And on the left side, you have the experiences that we believe characterize industrial era learning. So the models that we've inherited over 100 years ago. You've got sort of unlimited expectations. In the old model, people fundamentally believed, and they were very clear with us, that they designed a system that was for some people to win and some people to lose. And so we could understand who were going to be the managers, who was going to go to college, and who wasn't. It was very much based on some people have potential, some people do not, and school is going to help us figure that out. In a new era of learning, we need experiences and we need schools designed where we actually hold higher expectations for everyone, and we design experiences that allow everyone to access really unlimited opportunities. So that's an example of a real mindset experiential shift. And let me give an example because I think that understanding this in example is really important. Sometimes we will go into schools and they will say, we're really innovative. We're doing some really innovative stuff. Look at this awesome program that we have in robotics. And then you go in and you say, okay, like, how did the students get there? How did we figure out who was there? And they might say to us, well, this is for our AP kids. This is a program that is just for our AP kids. And you had to test into them. And then you find out, oh, it's 12 kids who are in this program. And let me be very clear. It is wonderful that those 12 children are getting that experience. Let's be very clear. That is awesome. But when you think about the other 1,500 kids that are in the school, you then have to think, well, what do they have access to? So then we go to a very different model, a school that we work with in North Dakota that has built a system of studios where you are able to build a curriculum alongside a teacher where you are able to learn about and try on a lot of different things before you have to commit. So in one of those studios, young people have decided we want to understand robotics. Even though we might have IEPs, we might not be in advanced physical sciences, we want to understand it. So teachers will work with them to get access to what is robotics? What is the history? What are the foundational math skills that you need? What are the foundational geometry skills that you need? What are the foundational? It's an example to show that that's a model that is basically saying everybody has opportunity. We can meet young people where they're at and allow them to be curious and excited and interested in things, even if they're not in advanced placement. That's an example of a very different way to structure, for instance, a robotics course and access to robotics that allows people to get what they need. Now, the students that are really far advanced in math, imagine they were to take these studios, they're going to take it to a totally different level because maybe they want to focus on robotics. But the young people who want to get access to that, who want to get access to mathematical ways of thinking and being, they should be allowed to get access to. What we've learned is that school should be a place for practice. It should be a place for trying things on. Maybe you're not perfect at it, but you try it on and you make mistakes. That's one example of a leap. Another example of a leap is moving from a narrow focus to a whole child focus. So you may walk into many schools where we are deeply attending to the cognitive and intellectual development of young people, and we should be attending to that. And we know from our insights in learning science that that's not the only thing that impacts learning. The relationships that exist in a classroom impact learning. Children's mental health, what they're coming into classrooms with, impacts learning. We have a model that is developed called in Van Ness Elementary called the whole child model. And that whole child model is really focused on getting young people ready and able and in their learning state, getting them ready to learn. So they have a system of whole school practice supports from the moment that you enter the doors at Van Ness all the way through your day that are all about getting you into your learning state and your executive functioning state. That's a kind of model that is attending to the physical needs of young people, the socio-emotional needs of young people, and ultimately those intellectual needs. So those are some examples. Other quick examples of leaps that we think are so important: moving from an individual focus to a much more community connection focus. We know that learning happens when humans as social creatures are able to socialize, are able to learn. That's really important. moving importantly from a one size fits all model where everybody's focused on the same thing to a much more customized way of learning. We think that's really important for schools to make those leaps. We think it's also really important to make the leaps where, you are focused on passive compliance in one learning environment to learning that is anytime, anywhere. And we definitely saw this break down during those pandemic closures, where once young people weren't in schools and they were on Zoom screens. I have seen many videos of young people through no fault of their own. They were fallen out because the just sleep, just whole classes sleeping, because ultimately they hadn't been learning the mindsets and the orientations of taking your own learning and being able to guide your own learning, whether you're in a school environment or not. So we know that schools and systems are going to have to think a lot about learning that happens anywhere, anytime, and giving credit for learning that happens anywhere, anytime. So those are the leaps. Those are experiential things that we know young people need. The experiences of schools need to change, and leaps are important in and of themselves. They aren't just enablers of outcomes. They're important in and of themselves, and we really need to invest in them. So those are some of our leaps, and we've got tons and tons of resources where people can read more, and you can see it in action. You can see schools that are really trying to prioritize and make these leaps through learning models that they've developed in their communities with their communities.
That sounds amazing. So let me ask you this: how do you handle, or how do you bring people who are skeptical, people who are still sold on the traditional approach, on board to these types of practices?
Yes, great point. And that is very real. And I want to validate what we experience in education, Dr. Tracee, you know this, is moving from silver bullet to silver bullet, from initiative to initiative. You wake up on a Monday, you're doing, I don't even know if this is a real program, but you're doing reading is power. And then on Friday, everybody's like, reading is power is trash. Now we're doing this. Teachers and educators are in a churn, and it makes it, they're in a churn of rotating silver bullets and flavors of the month. And it makes sense that you can be skeptical, that you can be tired, and that you're like, I can't do this anymore. What we have seen in the power of community based design is that it actually reignites that love of teaching that you were talking about. I cannot tell you how many educators have said, community based design treats me like I am part of the solution and not just the problem. And that's really important, is that we've got to look at educators in the face, young people, their parents, and we can't say, you are the problem for why this school is not getting the outcomes. We've got to say, you are part of the solution. You have ideas, you have life experiences that can be powerful. I think that what is the real key to getting folks who are skeptical is to get in there and try it. Sometimes you rebuild and you reconstruct your sense of belief and your sense of mindset after you've seen something working that you just didn't think could. You're just like, I'm not really sure if that's going to work. But we have seen multitudes of teachers who were skeptical in some of our schools where we're doing community-based designs. And then all of a sudden they're saying, wait a minute, I'm seeing an interdisciplinary history, math, and language arts session that the children are buzzing about, talking about during their lunchtime, during their free time. And you mean to tell me the kids are excited to learn, and I'm not having to force them to do homework because they're doing the home? What? Let me be part of this. So sometimes it is a seeing is believing. And then I think the next thing is we have to have processes that invite people into the table, that invite people around the table as part of the solution and not part of the problem. And I think we've really got to shift how we think about that. And community-based design is a process, I believe, that brings people around the table and reignites folks' love of learning. We can't just be telling educators in particular, you're part of the problem. You're why we're not. People are working, they're working to the bone, and they're working their hearts out. They're actually part of the solution, and we need processes that at their core believe and bring people around the table as part of the solution.
In the spirit of inclusivity, in the spirit of engagement, what would be your advice to parents who want to become a part of this work and who want to advocate for change in their children's schools?
Yes, I love this question, and I'll tell you, some of my favorite people in school communities are parents, because here's a couple things I've learned. One is I have been to your most resourced private schools. I've been to your big suburban schools. I've been to your under-resourced urban schools and everything in between. And one of the things I've heard from parents in all of those communities is that they want for their children to be really good people. They want for their children to be loved in schools. They want for their children to learn how to read, to learn how to do math, to learn what they need to survive. Parents want a lot of the same things wherever you go around the country, and that's something that really gives me faith. The great thing about community-based design is that anyone can start this process. So if parents want to get involved, we have a ton of resources. I'm not just here to hawk my book, and this is going to sound so absurd. I am slightly selling, but we want for parents to be able to pick up this book and to use some of the materials inside of it to get this conversation going in their schools. The thing about community-based design is it doesn't need to start with a superintendent. It doesn't need to start with, just a teacher. Those people are necessary as part of the process. Don't get me wrong. But the conversation can start with a group of parents saying, I want every classroom in my school to do a LEAPS survey. I want every classroom in my school, and we have that survey available on our website, Transcend Education, where schools can get access to doing this survey in all of their classrooms to understand our children, what are the kinds of experiences that young people are having in our schools? We think they're having one experience, but let's ask them and get the data. A parent could start with saying, I want to understand what my child, but then other children in the school are doing. So one is they can start by doing the LEAPS. We also have conversation starters for parents. You can take those conversation tools, and when you have time with your children, maybe you're in the car, maybe you've got some weekend time, maybe you're having dinner. Increasingly, parents are so busy, people are working, you could even text your kids. Okay, if you're able to, how was school today? Was there a teacher that spoke to you today that you thought loved you? Why? What is something that you learned in school that changed your mind today? Those are questions that we have in our Conversations with Kids guide. You can also find that at Transcend Education. Parents can take that and begin having those conversations with their children today, right now. And that, honestly, Dr. Tracee, is the beginning of community-based design. It is getting people from wherever you sit in the community to ignite this conversation and build the coalition that they need to build. Parents can do this with other parents today, right now. It gives you valuable insights to understand how your young people are actually experiencing school, not just what they're learning. That matters too, but you can get a totally different insight when you're asking young people how they felt in school today. That's one step parents can take right now.
And that is so helpful. We're going to actually use that in our parent education workshops.
Right.
We survey parents and we ask them what their needs are. And a lot of parents ask how to have difficult conversations with their children.
Yes.
And one of the things that we advise them is, first of all, start with their natural experiences. You don't just come at a child and then ask them a sensitive question. Or a
Right.
taboo question.
Yes.
But a lot of times, if you start with what happened in their day, then you can
Yes.
build to these things. And then you can also ask them, so who did you get that information from? Because a lot of
Yes.
times we go after and we just talk to children like what they said is preposterous, and then wonder why they shut down. Well, where did you find that information? Provide alternative information that is more reputable, right? But a lot of parents, you're right, don't know how to ask, well, what did you do today? And so a child, you pick them up from after school at 7 o'clock. I don't think they're going to get that descriptor. Oh, we ate, So how do you dig into those open-ended questions? So we want to use that as well. I'm doing a women's educator workshop next week
Yes.
in Readers. And so I am looking forward to sharing your work, because
Beautiful.
to reignite that inspiration, here are people to follow. Follow Jenee Henry Wood. Follow your organization. Read the books, because a lot of times we don't get started because we don't know how. So
Exactly.
I greatly appreciate the energy that you have brought to this conversation, because a lot of times reimagining our
Yes.
schools and reigniting excitement begins with the enthusiasm that we bring to the table. And not
Yes.
only did you bring enthusiasm, but you were very methodical in your approach and understanding the incremental baby steps that it takes.
Yes.
Because a lot of times we overwhelm educators, parents, and children when we say, like you said, the silver bullet. Like, okay, we're gonna just put an initiative out here and everything's gonna fall out
Yep.
perfectly. And everybody is looking at all these problems and we're not offering any answers. So
Exactly.
thank you for
Exactly.
this thorough level of methodical research that you were able to break down in ways that people can understand and giving practical tips and resources. This has been an amazing conversation, and we appreciate all that you have contributed.
Thank you so much, Dr. Tracy, and thank you for having me. I think what I would say is the solutions that we need for our schools and for our young people exist within us, exist within communities. All of the things are important, but there is not going to be one policy that's going to fix it. There's not going to be one silver bullet that's going to fix it. It's like we are the people. We have the solutions within our communities. And I think now more than ever, we need processes that are bringing people together to take positive steps and to work together towards solutions that matter. And so thank you so much for just being a place where people can get that information and to know that they can take a step and they're part of the solution too. We are not small and incapable. We are bigger than we think we are. And I'm so grateful that there are outlets like yours that are trying to tell people that more.
Well, it's great to have a partner in the work. Thank you again.
Thank you.
When you show us what we can be, give us the tools to succeed. They will strive, they will thrive, they